we are surrounded every day by art. And if more people were included as artists at any level, if we made art more inclusive, then the whole world would have a better attitude about it.
Welcome to the Evolve Podcast, an open forum on personal growth and cultivating a positive mindset. I'm your host, Joe Fitzpatrick. Today on the show, we have my longtime friend, Aaron Karlson. Aaron Karlson is a 3D artist and animator from Chesapeake, Virginia, and he currently lives in Gainesville, Florida. Aaron knew from a young age that he wanted to be a professional artist. He attended dedicated art education programs in high school to gain a foundation in fine arts, while he taught himself about the emerging medium of 3D art. Unable to afford art school, Aaron joined the U.S. Navy to finance his education. After 5 years in the military, he received a BFA in animation from the Savannah College of Art and Design. He recently completed an MFA at SCAD in interactive design and game development. Aaron currently works at the University of Florida as a 3D animator and lecturer, helping introduce students to the world of digital art. In addition to art, Aaron is passionate about long-distance running, history, and achieving life goals with a focus on the importance of building mental discipline. Let's go. Aaron, welcome. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, man.
So before we get started, I know you, but I want my audience to get to know you a little better. First off, can you please just introduce yourself, say who you are, what you do for a living, and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Aaron Karlson. I am a 3D artist and animator. I'm passionate about bringing original characters and stories to life. I'm passionate about pursuing goals and just kind of learning through life's experiences.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into those life experiences. One of your cats just come in.
It's one of my dogs. They know how to manipulate doorknobs now.
They're very smart. So I want to go back to the beginning, where your art journey originated.
For sure.
Can you tell me how you got started with animation and, pursuing that discipline?
Yeah. So I think it all goes back to the first movie I ever saw in theaters. Was Aladdin when I was 5 or 6 years old. And I always remember that experience because we were late to the movie. And ever since then, I've had this very peculiar idiosyncrasy about never being late to movies. But I saw Aladdin in a movie theater, and it was just this amazing experience of these characters that I knew weren't real, but they felt real to me. And ever since then, I had been trying to figure out, okay, how do I do that? When you're 6 years old, you're not thinking about careers or things like that. You're just thinking about, what do I want to do? But ever since then, I had pursued drawing very seriously, as serious as a 6-year-old can. I think everyone doodles and everyone draws when they're a child, but I read books on it. I got my dad to explain this book and okay, how do I draw things in 3 dimensions? And I learned about vanishing points at 6 years old. And just, I was obsessed with realism. I was obsessed with representationalism. Going through that experience and just becoming a better drawer all throughout grade school and then into high school, I was accepted into a gifted arts program that we have in Virginia called Governor's School for the Arts. I was a visual arts student and I was kind of doing the fine arts track. I think animation was always my inspiration, but it didn't really click as a career. This was in the early 2000s, and 3D animation had just started taking off and becoming more accessible to the everyday person outside of large studios. And I was taking this class called computer imaging, where everyone was kind of experimenting with Photoshop, experimenting with different types of computer art programs. And there was this 3D art program that I saw on the desktop, and I asked my teacher, like, hey, what does this do? And I think rather sarcastically, he was like, well, why don't you read this? And he handed me this 700-page manual. And so I read it, and I taught myself like 3D, like how do you make 3D animations, how do you make 3D buildings, all of that kind of stuff. And from then on, I was hooked. Like I signed up for that class like every single semester or quarter for the rest of high school. And I knew that no matter where I ended up, I wanted to be doing that. So yeah, that's kind of how I got started in terms of just like choosing my passion.
And when you say you were obsessed with realism, like what do you mean by that? And like what drew you to that specific type of art form?
Right. So I think for me, I looked at the things that I wanted to create, and I looked at, I would draw these like really intricate machines and these like really fantastical worlds, but I always tried to ground them in believability. I wanted to make sure that whatever I was creating was indistinguishable from real life, because if you can make a fictional world feel real, then you create immersion. And of course, I didn't think of the word immersion when I was a kid. I was just like, I could do better. I could make it more real. And I went through a period of time when I was in high school of just like, okay, learning how to draw faces, learning how to draw hands, tackling all the things that I think a lot of artists really need to tackle, and many of us, especially me, avoid. And that was like a turning point for me of just like, how close to photorealistic can I be? And that was just, I don't know, that's where I derived the greatest satisfaction in my creative life of just like, okay, when I'm making something, do I want to create good art, or do I want to create really, really representational art? And if you look at those two things as like two different choices, sometimes they coincide. But for me, I was just like, I'd rather create a really boring piece of art that's super realistic than a really exciting piece of art that's not realistic. And that's where I was back then, for sure.
Cool. Yeah. And it's, relatable because it is based in reality.
Mm-hmm.
People can understand what type of art you're trying to deliver, because it is based on something that exists in the world. And I'm sure that, relationship of like the viewer to whatever art piece it is, can make that a little bit more tangible for them and easier to grasp.
Yeah, MC Escher, I was obsessed with MC Escher. He had this quote, and he was like, if we create a universe, let it represent concretely real things. And for me, that was a really wild thing for him to say, because, if you look at his work, all of it is very fantastical. None of it is physically possible.
Right.
But he was hitting on that point of just kind of like, in order to take someone to a fictional place, in order to take someone to a fantastical place, the vehicle that they travel in has to be recognized by them. And so realism, while it isn't the end all be all, can be the language of building relationships between audiences and creators. So everyone uses it in different degrees, even when your goal as an artist is to completely supplant realism. Like even the most abstract artist deals with realism in that they are trying to go against realism. So we have this inherent relationship to it.
Yeah, it makes me think of this TV show that I recently watched, Mythic Quest on HBO Go, HBO Max rather, and it's about this this video game, kind of similar to like World of Warcraft, and in one of the episodes, it's like a prequel episode where the character is a science fiction novelist, and he's working with a couple other writers, and they're trying to tell him how the stories that he's writing should actually be based in reality, but then expanded upon to include, other types of science fiction, which is sort of expanding upon like
Yeah,
our idea of what's possible.
for sure.
That, that is a similar parallel to, I think, what you were talking about. And, I think the cool thing about art, while it can be based in reality, it can also, stretch our imagination of what is possible. And also you can play around with that too, like with creating these different universes and, games or movies, and sort of presenting like an alternative timeline, and I know you have some experience with like video games, and like how history is portrayed through video games. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've always been a history buff. Like my dad, that's kind of like one of the passions I feel like I inherited. Like I don't have like a moment where I'm like, I really like history. It's just kind of like, as a kid, like hanging out with my dad. And when you're a kid, you find people to latch on to of just like, oh yeah, they're doing this, so I'm going to do that. But he was always a big fan of history, and um, growing up, when I would play video games, I'm not even an avid video game player, but the video games I would be drawn to, I would notice like the games like Assassin's Creed, games like Call of Duty, and I wasn't the kind of person who was going on like the server and playing like multiple like multiplayer like battles like or anything like that. I was playing campaign mode because I wanted to experience the story. I mean, that's going back to that relatability thing, that believability. Like I knew a lot about World War II, so when I'm playing a video game about World War II, I look for those things of like, oh, there's that recognition. When I recently finished up my MFA in game design, I went into this thesis process being like, how can I make this about one of my other passions? And I totally get why a lot of my other classmates were like, okay, let me really invest in player representation in video games. Let me really dive into researching interactivity or immersion in video games. I was just like, how do we make video games about the Civil War more believable, right? And so that was kind of my I bifurcated my thesis to be more about the Civil War than I think about video games. But in the process, I ended up kind of like, I guess, coming up with this idea for an entire genre of video games called documentary video games. Essentially like the Ken Burns thing. Like when you sit down and you watch true crime, or when you watch like a History Channel thing, you're watching a documentary. But then when you watch like Downton Abbey, or like when you watch Pride and Prejudice, you know that what you're watching isn't historical representation. It's a docudrama. Right. Video games don't have that yet. Video games are so young, in fact, that they've been kind of given this free range of history. And I think it's indicative of how we don't take video games seriously. So it's just like, okay, well, since we don't take video games seriously at all, when they're representing history, we automatically know that they're unrealistic. But now that we have the technology to make video games more and more realistic, we have the ability to make them more and more representational, both through visual means and through historical means. So for me, I was just like, okay, what if we had a whole genre of video games where whenever you play them, you know that you are in the process of learning, and everything in this video game is geared towards giving you the most realistic experience possible. Right. So that was kind of my focus.
Right. Yeah. And I had the pleasure of watching your thesis presentation, which you put up on your Vimeo. So it was really interesting. And, I really am curious to know, like, if companies did decide to go that route with like making like a docu video game, like and that's something that is more realistic. And I feel like that it will be happening, especially with, the rise of virtual reality, becoming more and more prevalent in the video game space, with Facebook and the Oculus thing like becoming more widespread, as well as other, companies making similar products. So you can be in that immersive video game experience. It just makes sense for people to want to make something that is more lifelike. Like that seems to be the way it's going. Like, would you?
When I would talk to people about this, even the historians, especially the historians, because I feel like a lot of historians, they love video games. Just like I think one of the weirdest things that I've kind of learned that I didn't mean to learn is like historians love video games, and not just video games about history, but they love video games. And a lot of them were just like, no, don't ruin video games by making them about history. I'm like, you do this for a living. What do you mean? But I would say that documentary games already exist. It's just they're not labeled as documentary games. When film was first invented in the early 20th century, one of the very first films was a documentary. It was called Nanook of the North, where filmmakers explored some of the indigenous tribes of Canada and actually made a whole narrative about it. Now, I will say that a lot of the events of that film are under suspicion of whether they're actually true or not. But the presentation of that film was inherently different from the films that the Lumiere brothers was making or Georges Méliès was making. But it was only after that point where people were looking backwards and they're like, those two films are different. One of them's a documentary and so there are probably video games out there right now that fit the moniker of documentary games. It's just that we as an audience don't make that distinction in our mind yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, changing topics.
Yeah.
I know, like when we were growing up together, you were talking about wanting to be an animator for Pixar.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of your big career goals. Or are you more focused on teaching or pursuing something else? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's very interesting because like when you're a kid and when you're younger, you look at a lot of these things as like all or nothing, of just like I'm going to have this role and I'm going to do this thing and I'm not going to be done and I'm not going to have arrived until I'm there. But then, you grow older and you're just like, how capitalistic is it of me to think of an employer that I want to work for, right? I would say that yes, it would be a dream come true to work for Pixar. It would be a dream come true to get to do what I love doing. But as an artist, I think it's really important that, first of all, I am creating the work that I want to create, and also be realistic and state that art might be a really fun job, but it's still a job. And it's up to me to figure out, okay, what is the work that I want to create, and make sure that I'm creating that either through my work that I get paid for or through my own independent work. So it is still a goal of mine, it is still a dream of mine, but I would also say that I'm kind of living the dream now, knowing that a big theme of my life was I was unable to afford an education. Now I can provide that education to other people. So it's important to have dreams, it's important to have goals, but at the same time, there's no denying the satisfaction and just amazing ability to kind of discover a dream that you didn't know that you had. The fact that I actually get to share my passion of animation with students, many of whom are in the same position that I was in, literally not having access to education, that is something that I think about every day. That is something that, regardless of whether I teach for 10 more years or 2 more months, that is something I super value. My personal next move, honestly, is to continue to create films and artwork that I want to see, that I want to create. And we've seen a lot of that in recent film history. Like some of the most successful films have been short films created by independent creators, and video games as well. Cuphead, created by an independent studio. Hair Love, Oscar-winning animated short, created by an independent studio. And so for me, it's not necessarily about looking at that ultimate employer and saying that's where my happiness is. I need to define what my own happiness is and find an employer that fits that. So that's kind of where I'm at in terms of my career evolution.
Yeah, that's great. So are you looking to create your own studio, or do you want to join an existing studio?
Yeah, I mean I think that's a question that everyone asks themselves like every month, and it changes.
Me,
You know,
me too.
right? We're having a bit of an economy right now, and so the idea of like being like, all right, I'm going to set up this studio and I'm going to do blah blah blah. What I like to do right now is just kind of look at the tools that I have around me, and what can I do with those tools. And I have the ability right now to create films. I have the ability right now to create art, and I think every successful studio uh, is successful because the people within it are at a point in their art journey where they can most contribute to a team. I think I'm at that point, but I also think that there's opportunities for me to pursue more independent work, and fit into several different companies at a time. Like I do a lot of freelance work now, outside of my work, and I find it really fulfilling. Not only because I get to do a wide variety of things, um, but I also am not tied down to a particular job for a really long period of time. So my goal right now is to just kind of find where I fit. And if my path is to create my own studio, I think that will be revealed to me. But yeah, it's one of those possibilities for sure. I see why people do it. Most people creating studios have worked at other studios, and they're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. Let me do it my own way. So at least I'm very familiar with that, at least. So I've got that part of the equation down.
Yeah, and I like I said, I relate to that as well very much. I've been working full time for a while for someone else, and doing the freelance stuff on the side.
Yeah.
I definitely think one of my values in terms of my career is job security. So I would
Yeah.
like prefer to
Absolutely.
work for a full time person doing what I enjoy doing, which is why I've been somewhat hesitant to dive full in on the freelancing. Um,
Yeah.
there's a lot of risk involved with that, but I'm exploring my options with other job opportunities, and I know it'll work out one way or another.
Yeah. No,
Um,
it's so important to just constantly be seeking. I think people focus too much on finding. But I'm at the point now where it's like I put myself out there, and maybe I don't get those opportunities, but like I get people finding me, because it's just like I don't know. It's almost this return on investment of just like you apply to like 5 or 6 jobs, and then randomly someone will go to your website and be like, hey, I've got this job and I know you didn't apply for it, but and it's just that exchange that you kind of have with the universe of
right.
just like just try. And
Mhm.
people are like, okay, well, if you apply for 10 jobs you might only get one. Like you probably get 0 of them, but you're putting yourself out there, and that's forcing you to evaluate how people see you. And if you're
Right.
evaluating how people see you, you can change that. You can be aware of that, and so that will lead to opportunities. It's not always the opportunities that you're seeking, but it's
Right.
opportunity.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it that way. That's interesting. You are putting out that intention into the universe that you're seeking some type of position related to the
Yeah.
job you're applying for, and that could manifest in other ways that you don't necessarily know or expect.
Yeah.
It's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
I derive my dopamine from just like hitting that apply button, like that. You know, that's not where the equation stops. Like I'm not like, oh, if they offer me the job, I'm going to turn it down because I'm already satisfied. But like
Right.
I try to make that a goal, because if my sole goal is to get a job or get a contract or something like that, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't undervalue stability. Like obviously, yes, I want a job, but if I was discouraged every time I got denied for a job, I wouldn't be doing this anymore, because I've gotten rejected hundreds of times. So you got to find your motivation in multiple places.
Absolutely. And like you said, doing work on the side in addition to the freelance work, whether it's just a passion project or something to keep you going. I know like you've been doing a lot of animations on your own for me, it's this podcast or like
Yeah.
other video productions that I've done. It helps you to continue to put in the reps so you can bring more experience to the jobs that you do get.
Yeah, and it also helps you like look at your own job that you're doing, your day job in a different way. I think no one does their best work when they're disappointed, and if people kind of put their entire like life's work into one job, I think that just kind of increases the likelihood of interpersonal conflict or self-conflict of just like, you had everything riding on this. And for me, especially recently, I've been able to kind of detach in a healthy way from a lot of conflict situations and a lot of situations where Aaron, needs to have something this particular way, because I know that I have my stuff on the side where no one is stopping me from having things done a particular way. So I can let go. It's having more opportunities helps you let go and actually helps you become a better worker in your day job, honestly, at least in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey guys, brief pause in the episode to tell you about some of the great businesses that support this podcast. First, we got Weight Train. Use code EvolvedPodcast to get 10% off all Weight Train and Athleticity gym gear and apparel. No matter what you need for your workouts, they have the gear to help you get it done. And if you don't see something you want, email them at team@weighttrain.com and they will take your requests for new products. Visit Weight Train for all your gym gear needs. Next is True Nutrition. Use code EvolvedPodcast to get 5% off all nutrition supplements. I'm personally a fan of their soy isolate vegan protein powder, available in a variety of flavors and strengths, from light to heavy. They also have non-vegan protein powders if that's not your thing. I personally recommend the cinnamon bun and toasted coconut flavors in the heavy strength, and I add them to waffles, oatmeal, protein shakes, and ice cream. They're delicious. Check out their wide range of supplements at affordable prices that are third-party tested and verified for content quality. They are able to provide such great prices because the supplements come direct from the manufacturer without any marketing gimmicks or fancy labels. Visit truenutrition.com to supplement your workouts and your nutrition. Last is Hate Brand Goods. Use code EvolvedPodcast to get 15% off all Hate Brand clothing and accessories. Their goat shorts and shirts are the most comfortable clothing I've ever worn, and they have the coolest designs. However, their clothing drops are only available in limited quantities, so get your favorites while you can, and be on the lookout for other drops that you're stoked on. Visit thehate.com, spelled HVIII, for clothing to remind the world that you're not dead yet and you're ready to kick today in the dick. Back to the show. What would you say is your why for doing what you're passionate about? Whether that's animation or just, teaching and being a role model to other, potential animators.
I think for me, when I define passion to people, especially to students, because we all go into learning and we all go into our life's pursuit because we get an inordinate amount of pleasure from it. And so the biggest mistake that anyone can make is that, your passion is what you have fun doing. Not all the time. And I would say, especially with something like digital art or animation, I'm sure you can relate. There are parts that are not only not fun, but downright dreadful. And so the artist who only creates because it's fun will not create all the time. So for me, the why is kind of derived from what I end up doing, regardless of how tired I am. And regardless of what experiences I have with it, I find myself drawn to creating. I find myself drawn to doing these things that are super extra, and I have no explanation for them. It's almost just kind of like this gravity in a way of, it's so important to me that students understand particular topics, so I will make them like 30-minute long videos for an individual student. I'm trying not to do that so much anymore because I've only got so much time. But like, it
Right.
was so important when I first started teaching. Like, I would get students who are like, no one else does this, and I was just like, what? Really? Why? I'm just like, no, you're here to learn this. Like, I want to teach, and so I find my why in retrospectively asking myself, what have you done? Why have you done this? Why have you done all these extra things? And it just, for me, is just like this inexplicable passion to continue doing this process. And that's great because I don't have to remind myself what my passion is. And I'm sure my passions will shift as everyone does. And one day I'll wake up and I'll be like, oh, I find myself gravitating towards this particular thing. And then that will be my passion. But so far, the why of it has been just being inexplicably drawn to this kind of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I relate to that. There is definitely a gravity, I think, when it comes to the desire to do whatever creative pursuit that you feel like is your thing,
Yeah.
whether that's drawing or editing videos, photography,
Yeah.
even making TikTok videos. Like that's
Yeah.
become a thing, and it's awesome to see real people expressing their creativity through TikTok, and there's some great content on there, and I know you guys are doing a bunch of that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's great that you know it is cool when like you can get into that flow state,
Yeah.
and just time passes by,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you're in the zone, and even if you are getting tired,
Mhm.
it is not as much of a concern. Of course it is important to be mindful of how long you're sitting, and
Yeah.
being sure to get up and take breaks and whatnot, move around. But
Yeah.
you know you can definitely get in those moments where nothing else matters, and
Yeah, I live for that.
yeah,
I was
cool.
talking to my therapist about it, of just kind of like, he asked me that same question of like, why art? And I was just like, because there'd be like literal moments where I just like, I couldn't wait to go to school because there's a project on a computer at school that I'm just like excited to work on. Like, I dream about it, like I think about it. It's impossible to pull me away from. I'll have moments where I'm just like, oh yeah, I forgot to like eat. Which again, like what you were mentioning, is like, you gotta be mindful about those kinds of things.
Right.
But if you're like, if you're one of the people who are lucky enough to have something like that, where it's just like, oh wow, I can do this activity for like ever and never like stop, that's a key indicator that that activity is meant for you.
Yeah. What's a project that you're working on or recently finished?
So right now, I'm actually working on a really large environment in Cinema 4D, and it's it kind of started as this like cottage core cafe. When I went to school in Savannah, you've got a lot of like cafes that were made in these like 1800s houses, and so I really love this idea of mixing antiquated with modern comforts. And then that evolved into like, what if I put this on top of a huge whale? As is the question that any artist asks themselves.
Sure.
And so it was one of those projects where it's like, I didn't plan it that way, but it just continues to evolve. And I've been working on it on and off for about a year now, as kind of like a demo for my students. So, and this is kind of some of the things that I'm posting on Instagram now. I've got this cottage. It's on top of a whale, and there are these wooden floating staircases. And then this cottage is strapped to the whale with a giant belt. And then the whale has two lighthouses on its fins. And there are all these divers around that are kind of patrons of this cottage cafe underwater. And I'm going to call it Eat at Jonah's. Yeah, it's just this really absurd and weird environment that I think when people look at it, they're just going to be like, let me look longer, because this is such, it's every artist has that like thing of like, okay, let me model a gun, or let me model a house, or let me model this and that. And those are always amazing. Those are fantastic. I derive a lot of inspiration from them. But for me, with this current project, is just like, how absurd can I make this so that the viewer will always just be looking for the next thing inside of it.
Are you planning on making like a short with it?
Um, as far as animation goes, I'm not really, I'm not focusing on animating it too much. I am going to have like a fly through camera of the environment. Um, so that is something that I'm working on. As far as animation goes, I'm actually also making a film at work right now, which is a sequel to a 2017 film that we made for the Florida Museum of Natural History. And it is it's shaping out to be like an 8.5 minute film on which I am the sole animator. So in terms of like my homework, I feel like animation is going to be very exhausting, and I'm going to need a project that doesn't have animation in order to kind of like, take a break from that.
Yeah. And what's that film about?
So back in 2017, we made a film for the Florida Museum of Natural History centered around biodiversity. And there is this concept in biodiversity that's called the tree of life, which is a diagram that shows how all species are interconnected. It also is very helpful for scientists to help chart a lot of things going on in terms of endangered species and impacts on environment, and how the death of one species can lead to a decline in population of another species seemingly unrelated. So we made a film where it was basically like, we created this character called the tree tender, and it was this person who was essentially in charge of the tree of life on this giant fictional platform. And I think I have a link to that original film on my website. But there's this character named Gaia in the original film, that's her first day. It's her first day as the tree tender, and she has this robot character named Calvin who guides her through how to take care of the tree of life. And so that went really well back in 2017. That was my first like lead animator role, and that film was translated into like 7 different languages. And seen across the world. Like every now and then I'll meet like a biologist, and they'll be like, oh yeah, like I watched this film like a long time ago called The Tree of Life. And I was just like, holy crap, like I worked on that. But 5 years later, the people that we worked with were like, we want to do a sequel. And so now, we're in the process of developing that story of like, okay, what happens next? And so the film that we're working on right now is just introducing more biology concepts like phylogenetic diversity, and building off the interpersonal relationship between these characters, and kind of seeing where we go from there. All in the hopes that there's going to be a third film. So this is for a grant to pitch for a third film eventually.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you know if they'll be available for streaming anywhere?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's probably just gonna, like, after it's filmed, it's gonna be uploaded to the website that we have. It's treetender.org, and so that will probably be uploaded there as well. We host everything on Vimeo, so it'll probably be available for anyone to watch for free. And that's what's great about working with the museum. They have more of an interest in people learning information than they do about making money off intellectual property. So it just makes things more accessible, which I really like.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going from, 3D animation modeling to creating a short film, like, how was that process for you in your personal growth as an animator?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we never learn in school is how to work with others who don't have a creative background. I think there's a big emphasis on, you just got to be the best artist you can, and part of that is your soft skills. When we first made that film, the only person on the team who had ever made a 3D film before was myself. And so you got all of these people who are united in a common goal, and there's information exchange that needs to happen. A lot of times when you put information exchange on a project that has like a hard deadline, it's really hard to avoid that. Like, hey, we just got to get this done. Building interpersonal relationships and building communication mechanisms, and working with a team, and being an artist and a teacher at the same time that's hard. That was, especially for me, that was really difficult for me. And just really getting to know not only your weaknesses, but, the strengths and weaknesses of your team. Um, any artist can be a great artist. Not a lot of artists can be group artists, especially animators, where most of the time animation is done within a group. You have to have the temperament for it. And so for me, like, I don't think animation was the hardest part. I think the hardest part was literally just being like, I want to do things this way because I think this way will lead to good art. And then you have other people who are just like, not only are they not familiar with that way, they have their own thoughts and they have their own feelings, they have their own opinions. And so it's like, you can sit in your own room all day and do your way. That's perfectly fine. You'll probably, create a few small pieces. If you want to make a film, you have to pitch your way. You have to sell your way. You have to explain why your way is the best way. And you have to be open to this idea that, hey, just because it's the way you've been doing things for a long time doesn't mean it's the best way. And that's hard for people. And it's forced me to constantly, ever since that film, to constantly reevaluate what I'm doing and learning. I never want to be a person at any company or even my own company who does things a certain way because that's the way they've always been done. Never. I never want to do that.
Yeah, it's a good way to stay stagnant, right? If you
Yeah.
refuse to change your ways, and if you want to work outside of your comfort zone, you got to bring in more people. Like I
Yeah.
found that to be true, especially in film production.
Yeah.
The more like higher quality work you want to do, like you have to bring on more people because it's only possible for you to do so many things at one time.
Absolutely.
And if the more people you have involved, the greater the project's going to be.
Yeah.
As long as you have specific people assigned to specific roles that do those jobs well.
Yeah.
So
I like to.
So important. Yeah.
Yeah. I like to look at like the idea of control as like the dark side of any creative endeavor. Like I think artists are very susceptible to this idea of controlling everything because that's just how they've always created, of just like, hey, I'm a great artist because I do these things. And when you get in that group dynamic, it's hard. It's hard to surrender control. But like you mentioned, like the film set thing, like I think that's a really great analogy for people to kind of understand, of just like, you can't run lights, be the, director of photography and producer at the same time. It's just physically impossible. But a lot of artists don't want to think about what is physically possible. We want to think about what is ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you have the budget, to hire more people, you can expand your creative consciousness, because you don't have to focus so much on doing everyone's job. You can do your job better with more mental capacity.
Absolutely. It's freeing in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Whenever you get into a creative slump, what do you try to do to get out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of dealing still with this idea of burnout. It's hard for me to look at burnout as like this phase that starts and ends. Like you could be in burnout for like years at a time and never really recover, because when you feel like you're recovered, you jump back into it. So the creative slumps that I have are usually related to burnout. There's no shortage of ideas that I have. Like I always want to create. But for me, going into physical activity is the best way for me to feel like I can put that energy somewhere. And long distance running half marathons and things like that have been really helpful, especially during the pandemic. During the pandemic, I was in grad school and having to deal with both of those things, and literally life never stopping. I felt very trapped. And one of the best ways to not feel trapped is to run from point A to point B and back. So,
you're literally not trapped because you're running.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's something that I got from my experience in the Navy, because when I was in the Navy saving up for art school, all of my friends were in art school and they were quote unquote getting somewhere with their life. And so for me, I was just like, I've always had that attachment to running, of just like, if I can run, then I'll feel accomplished. I might not be any closer to my dreams or anything like that, but at least I know that I've accomplished something. So for me, like the creative slump is easily, not easily, but most effectively dealt with by not driving my fist into a wall and trying to be creative. It's kind of trying to like almost pull the bowstring back of, if you imagine like the point of the arrow is where you want to be, if you pull that bowstring back and you charge yourself with physical activity, then when you approach creative endeavors again, you have that energy, you have that spring back to be more creative. And I come up with so many ideas when I'm running, so it helps me.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Van Neistat? He runs the Spirited Man.
No,
Uh,
is he related to Casey Neistat?
he is, yeah.
Okay.
He's his brother.
Okay.
But he has a video that I love on YouTube called "Running." Wait, does running suck? And in the video, he describes running uphill as drilling into his mind, and running downhill as the pumping out of
Mm.
new ideas.
No,
Um,
yeah, that feels very real.
yeah, it is. And I have personal experience with running as well. I haven't done it in a while because I've replaced it with cycling. Uh,
Yeah,
and I
cycling.
think, cycling is just as good, if not
Yeah.
better, in my personal opinion. But running served me very well when I was still doing it. It helped me literally push myself outside of my comfort zone. And I think it changed my perspective on myself and my body and my mindset
Mhm.
of what I was capable of doing. And it helped me to uh, change other habits in my
Oh yeah.
life, and
Yeah.
that includes many things.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm happy to hear that it was and continues to be helpful for you.
I think just the idea of like setting a goal and like achieving it and even just like pushing beyond it. We as humans we're ready to do that in a physical sense. It's like, if you have to do something physical and you have to, one up yourself, and like whether it's like cycling for 5 more miles than you used to, or running for 5 more miles than you used to, or lifting like 10 pounds more than you used to,
Mhm.
we are more ready to do that than push ourselves creatively, in my opinion. Um, I think a lot of us creatively, we want to do the same thing over and over again because we derive satisfaction from it. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is look at my creative work as a workout, as something that I can kind of push my achievements on, as something where I can get better. I think a lot of artists and a lot of creatives look at getting better as an inevitable process. And like
Mm.
if you do something long enough, you'll get better. But when it comes to physical activity, we get better by saying we are going to get better. So I think
Mm.
running for me has helped me learn that, of just like, well, you can if you can set a goal to run a half marathon, then you can set a goal to becoming a better artist and actually set milestones to accomplish that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, it's not just about the act of doing it, but it's about the act of communicating to yourself what are your intentions for doing
Yeah.
that, and
Yeah.
um, setting a setting a certain expectation of like what you hope to achieve within a certain time frame. And
Right.
um, they say, like, I don't know who they is, but people, I've heard from people in like human resources and stuff talking about goals and how they should be smart. Have you heard of SMART goals? Like
Yeah.
specific, measurable,
Right.
actionable. Uh, R is
I just
realistic. I think it's realistic, and then
right.
T is time sensitive.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that really nails down like what you were saying. If you have uh, a specific goal in mind within a certain time frame that is realistic and achievable, you know,
Yeah.
then that can help you to push it to that next phase that you want
Yeah.
to.
It's a very great way to hack your own mind, because it just we love cycles. Like we love, that kind of process of like, okay, you do X, Y, and Z, and you go through this process and you get that next chunk, that next improvement, that next like life mod, and then you go through that again. Just knowing that there is a plan to get better is so helpful. It's not up to you to just be like, I don't know, just get better. Like if someone went up to you, no matter what you did, and was just like, hey man, just be a better artist, or like be a better cycler, be a better photographer, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
we still have an emotional attachment to what that means. So we have to hack our mind to help our goals match up with the emotions that we have around our goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when you were saying that, I was thinking about, how we can often compare ourselves to other creative people on social
Yeah.
media.
Oh God. Yeah. That's
Uh,
hard.
yeah, it is really hard.
How do you deal with that?
It's it's a process. I mean, sometimes I feel a certain level of imposter syndrome, and I know other people feel that too in many areas of life.
That doesn't go away.
Yeah, and I just try and tell myself that what I'm doing has value. It's cool to me, and if I like it, someone else will like it. And it's okay to be at the level that I'm at as long as I keep pushing myself to be better.
Right. Right. My friend Francis and we've come up with this idea of like this double-sided coin of improvement, and you have to be equal parts self-deprecating and overconfident. If you're not overconfident, then you'll never shoot for like really audacious goals. And if you
Yeah,
never shoot for audacious goals, you're never going to grow, right? But
right.
at the same time, if you are in this state of constantly achieving and constantly meeting goals, you get in that, you get very stagnant because it's just like you're not realistic on what you can improve. You
Mhm.
want to be equal. You need both. These emotions that we have, like imposter syndrome, one of the reasons why we have it is because it serves a purpose.
Right.
It helps push us forward. But at the same time, if we experience it so much that it keeps us where we're at, no amount of lamenting ever made anyone successful. So to me, the idea that all creatives feel imposter syndrome, no matter what level you're at, we all feel it because we are the imposter syndrome that we really feel is when we compare ourselves to who we could be, to our future self. It's not even that other person on social media. It's just that you envision that it's very possible for you to be that. And the fact that you are not that now is what makes it really, really hard. Because, if we compare ourselves to people that we don't even know, it's not really realistic that we're envious of that person. It's just that we see that as something that we should have.
Right. It demonstrates that it's achievable because
Right.
someone else is doing it, and we
Yeah.
could get anxious about why we are not achieving that.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I love cooking, because like there are tons of other chefs out there who are much better than me, and I feel no envy about it because I'm not even going to try. So it's
Right.
like it's so easy for me to enjoy that medium of art because I'm not even going to begin. Like, I'm sure if I became a professional chef, I would have that imposter syndrome of like, oh, But you tend to only have imposter syndrome about things that you were meant to do.
Yeah, totally. Or things that you're trying to pursue,
Right.
if
Yeah.
it's just something that's more of a hobby
Yeah.
or, something that you're not even interested in, then you have no attachment to that.
Right. Exactly. So you kind of got to look at the back end of that emotion and figure out, okay, now that I have this emotion, what do I do with it? And that's what's important about it.
Yeah. Do you have any habits that you practice that help you to stay productive, remember new ideas, or add value to your life? And if so, what are they?
Um, yeah, I mean, I've had a battle with ADHD and productivity. I get very distracted. So for me, like just curating your space is really important. Like,
Yeah.
you know, the idea that you can go into any space and be your most productive self, that's ideal, but it's not always realistic.
Sure.
So for me, like at work, we have these offices that we use for office hours, and I just hijack them, and I just never leave. And so I do that. I also practice this habit of 25 and 5, where I'll set a timer for 25 minutes. And then I won't take a break until that timer is up, and then I'll take a 5-minute break. And what I find is that after a few cycles of that, I won't even want to take a break anymore, because I'm just in the process of breaking past that initial morning barrier of like, I don't want to do this, which happens with everything. That is the most important thing for me. And so that's what I've been trying recently.
That's cool. I've never heard of that before.
You should try it. It's really good.
How long have you done that?
I would say for about a month. And I use it for really, really difficult tasks that I don't enjoy doing, like grading. I think grading is, it should be a method of torture, and I hate it, and I'm the worst at it. So what I just do is I don't look at productivity in terms of, can you complete this really long task? I look at productivity as, hey, it's been 25 minutes. You've been working this whole time. Take a break. And you might not be done with the task, but guess what? You're more done with the task than you would have been if you were procrastinating and not working on it. So that helps.
Right. I mean, it makes sense. You take a longer goal and then you break it up into smaller goals. That makes it more achievable. Does that come from someone, or did you make that up yourself?
I think it's an amalgamation of a lot of things. I mean, we're very obsessed, whether you go on TikTok, there's like life hacks and stuff like that. We're very obsessed with this idea of there's going to be a magic spell for things. And honestly, you just have to find what works for you. What works for one person is not going to work for you. But I do operate from this principle of, because I've read a lot of David Goggins' books, and I think he puts things in really, really harsh terms that could be translated into everyday speak for a lot of things. But one of the things that he talks about is just you gotta fight your mind. You gotta like fight your brain, because your brain is going to tell you a lot of things about like what you want and what you don't want. And you literally have to fight against that. And so just putting it into context that there's no way for me to inherently want to do a lot of things. Right. I have to do them. And through the process of doing them, I find that I actually will keep doing them, because guess what? Your brain is often wrong about what it wants. So that it's kind of an amalgamation of David Goggins and a bunch of other just like things I've trial and error for sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm a fan of David Goggins as well. Callous the mind.
Yes, yes, exactly. Callous the mind for sure.
Yeah, and try and change your mindset to one of growth rather than feeling stuck, because that's not going to help you.
Absolutely not.
And yeah, he's all about self-discipline, and I know another person, Jocko Willink, says motivation is crap.
Yeah.
Because discipline is really what's more important, because that's what's going to help you get to the gym or wake up when you're supposed to. Motivation is not going to help you do that.
It's not real. We spend so much time of our life waiting for motivation, and it's just, motivation is in the doing. Motivation is literally just like, I hate running the first mile of any run I do, but after I run that first mile, good luck getting me to stop. So that waiting for motivation is something that a lot of people need to stop doing, and it's just, you have to make your own.
Yeah. And speaking of running, you actually did your last marathon with your mom, right?
I did so my mom is kind of like retired from running. I've done a couple 5Ks with my mom, but she's the one who really got me into it, because like she has this wall full of medals. And so I remember, even when I was in Florida, I made it a point to fly to Virginia, do a half marathon, and then fly back to Florida the very same day, which was stupid. But I wanted to make sure that my mom was at my very first half marathon, so I did that.
I bet your legs were hurting on that plane back.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, just getting up from the seat was terrible. Like, I've never experienced pain like that in future marathons that I've done. But that first one, like that was dumb, because it was like on a Sunday morning. So I flew from Florida to Gainesville on a Saturday, and then right after my run. I think my flight was at 4 p.m. And so like I literally went straight to the airport, and it was the worst decision ever. Oh my gosh.
Oh boy. How do you practice self-care in your life to give yourself energy to focus on your personal growth?
A lot of self-care for me right now is saying no. I am a people pleaser by nature. I will say yes to opportunities just because I think they're exciting, not because they actually fit within my schedule. And just understanding that you only have a certain amount of energy a day. So self-care for me actually looks like turning down a lot of opportunities because I know that I wouldn't be my best self, whether that's opportunities to like, do workshops for people, or whether it's opportunities doing small freelance gigs. Like I have to, the only person who's really going to advocate for you is you. So self-care looks a lot like that. Self-care also means trying to not guilt myself for not working. I just moved into a condo with my girlfriend, and there's so many home things that we need to do. And I'm the kind of person who's like, I want to do all these home repairs and all this artwork. And I haven't really had a chance to do artwork over the last few months, but going back to that environment thing that I said before, self-care also means, hey, you got to be okay with not working on things that you want to work on, because your environment will help you work on those things in the future. And so self-care also looks like prioritizing things, and being okay with taking breaks.
What's an obstacle that you're currently facing or recently faced, and how did you overcome it?
Gosh, I think if I don't have a current obstacle, I feel like I'm not living. I think for me, there was this kind of obstacle of dealing with my kind of like future goals of, okay, there's a lot of my work that involves creating art. There's also a lot of my work that involves teaching. And if I want to be a better teacher, a lot of times that means working on things that are not artistic. It's like lesson plans, it's like grading and all those kinds of things. And I've had this kind of obstacle in my life recently where it's just like, I feel like I'm at the beck and call of a lot of people. And again, that's just like saying no. One of the biggest obstacles that I had during my last quarter at grad school, we had a teacher quit, and then I was thrown into that position to cover that teacher, not having any knowledge of that class or any background. It was, it was a game in interactive writing for games. So it was taught by this person who has a doctorate degree in English. I have a doctorate degree in nothing. But I do have a degree, and I was getting a degree in games. And so, people at work were like, oh, games and games, they're the same. They're the same. And so I was thrown into that. At the same time, same week as that happened, I got into a car wreck that totaled my car. I had to do jury duty, and I was working on my thesis. So I kind of described that time as like the worst, best time in my life. And I think what really clicked for me was this idea that I didn't have time to do nothing. I got a new car within a week. I did the whole like insurance like thing. I got like a car loan all within a week. So like I found out my car was totaled on Monday. The accident was on Friday. Found out my car was totaled on Monday, drove to jury duty, had my friend drive me to jury duty on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I was teaching a class that I had never taught before. Thursday, I was picking out a car. Friday, I bought the car. And then on that Friday, I also had a meeting with my thesis advisor explaining why I'm so behind on my thesis, but then I finding out that I was actually more ahead than a lot of other people. So in terms of obstacles, it was really a self-affirming thing of just realizing that you can make little moves in a lot of areas, and knowing that you can overcome this overwhelming life thing of just like no control. I think any nightmare situation for me is a situation where I have zero control over anything. And just knowing that there are steps forward that you can take, it might not fix everything right away. I I just threw myself into that. Like I feel like there's a scale of just like when a task is too easy, I'm not interested. And when a task is like super impossible, that's when my interest is peaked. And that's when I kind of just dive into it and just fix everything. Cause it's just like, okay,
Yeah.
well, yeah, it's like a movie. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, hold my beer, watch me do this.
Yeah. 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 And it's super great to have those because like when I'm having doubts and when I'm having struggles now, I can relate back to that moment of just like, hey, remember when that happened? Okay, well, you survived that, so you'll survive this.
Yeah, exactly. And it's affirming for you that,
Yeah.
when difficult situations arise, you won't get overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
You can take pause and
Sometimes, yeah,
do what you got to do. Yeah.
you don't always have the choice to do nothing.
Right.
Sometimes you just have to, like, you just have to go. You just have to move. And no amount of being sad about it is gonna, feel your emotions for sure, but you gotta do something because no one, like David Goggins like to said, no one's coming.
Right.
Like you gotta do it yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Got to have that self-reliance to
Mhm.
keep going in the right direction and
Yeah,
get stuck in your feelings,
yeah,
feeling sorry for yourself. I
yeah.
agree. So we're going to move towards wrapping up, but I
Okay,
have a few recurring segments on the podcast that I like to
okay.
ask all the guests.
Yeah, for sure.
First off, starting with our mindset moment. What is a quote or tip you use that inspires you to keep going and stay positive despite personal hardships?
For me, there's this quote that I remember from high school from Robert Henry, and he says that the goal is not to create art. The goal is to be in that state which makes art inevitable. So I try to focus on that when it comes, whenever I get just too into productivity and when I get too into the results mindset. I try to remember that quote and try to remind myself it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be enjoyable. And then I do whatever I can to make sure that my environment and the things that I'm working on are suited towards my individual, I guess, homeostasis requirements.
And what's your um, perception or interpretation of making art inevitable? Like, what do you think he meant by that?
Yeah, and I love that it's like such an open-ended quote, and I think it's different things for different people. I think a lot of people feel creative maybe when they're sad. I think a lot of people feel creative when they don't have uh, you know, any worries or anything like that. For me, art becomes inevitable when I know that I have a really, really great idea. So a lot of times I just spend time making up ideas. I have a book where I write kind of all my ideas down, and maybe a lot of them will never be made. But I think it's important to have those ideas that are challenging enough and feasible enough for me to just kind of latch on and go with. Another part of it is just being really open to the idea that when you're creating, it's supposed to be an open process. You don't start with a vision in mind and then you complete that vision. You complete like the grandchild of that original vision. Um, and then also art is inevitable when things in your life are taken care of. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you don't start getting into art until you're like near the top. Like, are
Right.
you are you fed, are you safe, or all these things, and you can just imagine how hard it is to create art during a global pandemic because it's just really low on those priority things. But art becomes inevitable when you take care of things that need to be taken care of, at least for me.
Yeah, that's true. And I feel like it could also help serve other needs of your life as well. Like art, in one sense, can be a means to, living a better life. Once you get to that level where you are making money off of your art that can sustain you.
Mhm.
Um, it also brings a sense of purpose, which can fill your cup in other areas that
Yeah, for sure.
in that.
Yeah.
Um, you can think of artists over the years, that, weren't living very well, but their art, like the work itself, was thriving. So, I mean, it begs the question of which area needs to be served first, in order to, have everything met. Of course, you want to have the full picture of, having your hierarchy of needs taken care of in addition to your art, but
Yeah.
that's not always the case.
I mean, I try to remind myself that the fact that I'm like a professional artist is like, I feel very lucky to be doing what I'm doing, because that stereotype of just like, oh, you'll never make money as an artist is definitely true. Like, I mean, it's definitely out there, but I don't think it's true. So when I'm having my worst days, I just try to remind myself, I'm like, you do this for a living, so things can't be as bad as you think they are. And so, just remembering what you have. And I'm sure a lot of those artists as well, who are like kind of living in poverty, had that mentality too, of just like, art is so important to them that they would forego other needs that they have.
I feel like I should have asked this earlier on in the podcast, but how do you define art?
I've thought about that for a long time, because it's hard to define art without excluding things. So I've come up with the most absurd, I guess, definition of art as that which is created to be seen.
Okay.
So in that sense, a bridge could be art. And of course, you've got civil engineers who are designers, like they design things. You've got painters, whether it's abstract or realistic. Like if you are doing something with the intent to be seen, to me, it's art.
Right. And we live in a visual world where everything is meant to be seen.
Yeah.
Some things have more aesthetic value than others.
Yeah.
But also, in the eye of the beholder, right?
Yeah. I used to have that mentality, and a lot of people have this mentality still, of just like exclusionary art definitions. And I've had that for a long time, of just kind of like, this is art and these things are not art. And while I do believe that hierarchies are kind of important for the self, so that that, when I was a kid, I would draw stick figures, and now I'm at this level. When you start trying to apply your own internal hierarchy to other people, does that really make the world better? Does that encourage creativity? And I think one of the reasons why people they have this idea that like art is not a worthwhile career. Well, guess what? If they've never been to a movie, if they've never bought like an iPhone or anything that's had been designed, then yeah, sure, I would get it. But we are surrounded every day by art. And if more people were included as artists at any level, if we made art more inclusive, then the whole world would have a better attitude about it, honestly. And people would be more supportive of other people's art dreams. But we're kind of living in this world where there are millions of unseen artists, because we literally cut people out. We say, you're not good at this, so you'll never be an artist. And I don't think that benefits us in the long run.
I agree with you 100%. Next segment is PMA Warrior of the Week. Who is someone who inspires you to keep a positive mental attitude?
This might seem like the stereotypical answer, but I think my girlfriend, who is also an artist, her name is Chelsea Cantrell, and she inspires me to keep a positive mental attitude, because I'm one of those kind of people who I get frustrated very quickly. I get angry very quickly. And things are never as big of a deal as I think they are. And it's, watching her through her achievements and her like struggles and her challenges, still maintain this kind of passion and love for what she does. It's very inspiring. I think she makes it look very easy to go through what she goes through and achieves what she achieves, and still have energy to do more. Very inspirational to me. And I talked to her about this, because I know her and I had different master's degrees experiences, and I would always say that whenever I would feel like I couldn't do it, I would look at all the things that she was doing and I'd be like, well, okay, you got to get up. You got to do something, because like she's like knocking it out of the park. She's doing all this amazing stuff. Like if she can do it, like, where's your excuse? So it's inspiring in a motivational way, and it's also inspiring and kind of like bringing my attention back to what's important.
Yeah, it's good to have a partner that you can relate to, as well as look up to, and share those similar values of like what you want to achieve and like the art you want to create.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Last is good food, good mood. I know you said you like to cook.
Yeah.
What is one of your go-to meals that helps you to feel your best?
So I'm not a vegan. Mostly because I'm kind of just experimenting with vegan recipes. I like food of all kinds, but one of my favorite recipes is actually this vegan chickpea curry that I've kind of made, especially starting during the pandemic. And it's not anything too fancy, but it has rice, which I love. It has like curry and all these really, really great flavors, and it lasts for a really long time. So I find that sitting down with some naan bread and some vegan chickpea curry and like a warm sweater, even in summer because I'm crazy. It has that mix of flavors. And there's like this like really hint of like lime that kind of just like wakes me up. And so, it's not the Ernest Hemingway of foods, but for me, it's sustenance. It kind of just reminds me of the energy to life balance that food gives you. I love it. I'm obsessed with it.
Yeah, I love curry with rice as well. It's great comfort food, and it's usually on the healthier side. What do you put in your curry? Like, do you mix in other vegetables other than the chickpeas?
Yeah, so it's basically chickpeas, onions, cherry tomatoes. I also put tofu in it just for like that extra, like I guess, hardiness of it.
It has protein too.
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't know. I like that it's a food that lasts. Like if I make it, it'll last the whole week. And just anything you put rice into. So yeah, I've got all those in the mix, and I'll probably start experimenting, adding more things. But it's the bomb. Like I love it.
What kind of curry sauce do you make?
So I'm kind of basic right now at the moment. I'll just use like the curry, not powder, but paste. Anyone that you can get at the store. Like I use like the red curry paste. But I do want to get into more like Indian dishes. Like a lot of people that I follow on TikTok are like these really great Indian chefs. I want to try like butter chicken. I want to try all these things that are just like super complex and have like a ton of flavors in it. So that's kind of my gateway food into that whole food sphere.
Sweet. Yeah. Well, I know we've gotten Indian food before together, so we should definitely do it again.
Oh yeah, dude, for sure. No, absolutely. I'm always down.
Sweet. Last question is, where can people follow along with you if they want to, continue to check out your journey that you're on?
Yeah, so I mean, my main website is Aaron Karlson. So Karlson with a K, Aaron, Karlson, KARLSON.com. I've also got the Twitter handle and Instagram, Karlson Animation. So it's like basically Karlson Animation, but without the
and that'll be in the show notes as well.
Oh, perfect. Okay, cool. Thank you. I think a lot of people misspell my name, but yeah, I'm usually active, very active. I feel like Twitter is mostly my life advice channel now, but Twitter, Instagram, and then obviously my website are kind of where I'm posting most things nowadays.
And you're pretty active on TikTok too, right?
Yeah, well, my girlfriend is super active on TikTok. She's got like 30,000 followers. So like I'm featured in there. And what I'm going to be doing soon is kind of creating my own TikTok brand of just sharing my art, trying to motivate me to create more. And I'll probably start posting that in the new year.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks again, Aaron. It was great talking to you. Love our conversation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, man. Thanks for having me, Joe. Appreciate it.
Hey guys, thanks for checking out our podcast. I hope you got a lot out of it. and it was helpful for you in your personal growth journey. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, please do so on your preferred podcast provider. We're available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Stay blessed and keep the PMA. Later.